Before evil ever existed, there was only light, a kingdom of flawless harmony, where every angel blazed like living fire and every voice thundered in praise of the Creator. Heaven was not just beautiful, it was perfect. But hidden in that perfection was the seed of a catastrophe. Among the countless beings of glory, one shone brighter than them all. His radiance eclipsed the stars, his wisdom stirred awe, and his beauty was so pure that even the archangel Michael marveled. He was not just another angel, he was heaven's masterpiece. His name was Lucifer. But what if I told you that the most magnificent creation of God would one day become his greatest enemy? That the angel who once led heaven's choirs would become the serpent who whispers in shadows? That the most honored being of light would fall so far he would drag 1/3 of heaven with him into darkness? This is not just a story of pride. It is a story of freedom, betrayal, cosmic war, and a destiny that still shapes the world you live in today. And tonight, we will trace his entire journey, from the heights of unimaginable glory to the curse of eternal exile. This is the complete story of Lucifer like you've never heard before. You are watching Faith Unlocked, where the hidden truths of Scripture and history are unveiled like never before. Now, let us descend together into the first great rebellion. Chapter 1. Before evil existed. In the beginning, long before the first man ever walked the earth, long before the first drop of blood was ever shed, there was only radiance, a realm untouched by darkness, a kingdom without conflict. Heaven itself pulsed with the brilliance of the Creator, a sea of unending light that no shadow could pierce. The angels, countless in number, vast in variety, were like living flames. Each bore a reflection of the glory of their Maker, each a different hue of divine beauty. They did not question their purpose, for their very existence was worship. Their voices rose in harmonies that shook the foundations of eternity, and their song was singular, to magnify the one seated upon the throne. It is impossible for the human mind to imagine such perfection. On earth, even moments of peace are fragile, like glass ready to shatter. But in that higher realm before evil, there was no war, no jealousy, no fear of death. There was only goodness, as though every atom of heaven itself was saturated with love. Every being bowed willingly, and their joy was unbroken. And yet, even in a kingdom so flawless, history whispers of something unexpected. For perfection is not the same as control. The Creator, in his infinite wisdom, granted his angels something far more dangerous than eternal bliss. He gave them freedom. For freedom carries risk. The power to choose means the power to love, or the power to betray. Even in the highest courts of heaven, that risk lingered quietly, unseen, until it finally revealed itself in the most dazzling of all beings. Among the celestial host, one angel towered above the rest in majesty. His radiance eclipsed the stars themselves. His voice, when he sang, was said to weave light into melody, a harmony that guided the entire choir of heaven. This angel was not merely a servant, he was a masterpiece, the first created, the seal of perfection. His very name meant light bearer. He was Lucifer. But here, in this first chapter of his story, he was not yet the enemy. He was still pure, still blameless, still the crown jewel of the celestial realm. Imagine him then, not as a horned demon, not as a serpent slithering in shadows, but as a being of indescribable splendor, arrayed in brilliance like polished jewels, every facet of his being reflecting the artistry of his Creator. And still, as the heavenly hosts marveled at their companion, there was no hint of rebellion. For ages untold, the courts of heaven echoed with joy. The Creator's throne was encircled by adoration, his name exalted by cherubim and seraphim, by archangels and messengers alike. It was a kingdom without fracture. This is the part of the story most people forget. Before Satan was the deceiver, before he was the accuser, before he was the serpent of Eden or the dragon of Revelation, he was flawless. He was admired. He was loved. He was trusted. Even though the universe pulsed with unity, creation was not static. Heaven was alive. Worship was not mechanical, it was chosen. And in this divine gift of free will, the possibility of something unthinkable existed. The Creator had not built machines nor slaves. He had sculpted beings of glory with minds, hearts, and wills, and that meant that love itself could one day be tested. For now, however, the harmony remained unbroken. If you had stood in that realm in those days, you would have believed that nothing could ever change. Every voice was one chorus. Every angel's face shone with delight. There was no dissent, no shadow of pride, no suspicion. If the human race calls Eden a paradise, then heaven was something greater still, not a garden, but an eternal kingdom where peace reigned unchallenged. And yet, history records with chilling clarity, perfection does not mean permanence. The prophet Ezekiel, gazing back across the veil of time, described Lucifer in words almost too lofty to believe. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were blameless in your ways until wickedness was found in you. Until. That single word carries the weight of cosmic tragedy. It is the moment the first crack formed in the flawless glass of heaven's peace. A diamond, unblemished, flawless to the eye. But deep within its core, a fracture invisible at first begins to spread. Slowly, silently, but inevitably, it will shatter the whole. In that radiant kingdom, there was no war, no violence, no enemy. And yet the first enemy was already taking shape, not outside, but from within. Not from a foreign power, but from the heart of one who had once been the brightest star. This is the paradox that startles the human soul, that the very possibility of evil was born not in darkness, but in light, not in weakness, but in beauty, not in ignorance, but in wisdom. So before there was death on earth, before there was sin in Eden, before Cain lifted his hand against Abel, there was a greater fall waiting to happen. Heaven itself would become a battlefield. But in this first chapter, we linger in the silence before the storm, in the harmony before the discord. No war, no death, only infinite goodness, but a crack was about to appear. That is where the story of Lucifer truly begins. And if such a fracture could appear in the most radiant of all beings, then what does that mean for us? Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we will witness the rise of heaven's masterpiece, a creation so extraordinary that even eternity marveled at him. But what happens when perfection forgets its source? That is the secret waiting to be unveiled. Chapter 2, Lucifer, heaven's first masterpiece. If you could travel back to the dawn of creation, before the stars were hung in the heavens, before the seas rolled upon the earth, you would witness a single being who embodied the artistry of God in a way no other ever would. His name was Lucifer. Lucifer was not merely another angel in the multitude. He was the firstborn of heaven's host, the archetype of beauty and brilliance. Ezekiel's ancient words echo across time. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Imagine what that means. Not just intelligent, not just radiant, but the very standard by which all other creatures measured themselves. If creation is a vast canvas, then Lucifer was its signature stroke, heaven's crown jewel. Heaven itself marveled at him. His body was adorned, as Scripture describes, with precious stones, sardius, topaz, emerald, sapphire, and diamond. He shone like a living cathedral of light, his very form reflecting the splendor of the throne of God. His movements were like flowing fire, his eyes carried the brilliance of eternity, and when he opened his mouth to sing, the sound was not like a single voice, but like choirs woven into one. It was said that Lucifer stood over the mountain of God, walking amidst the stones of fire. This mysterious phrase has been debated for centuries, but its meaning is clear. He dwelled in the very presence of the Almighty, nearer than any other. While the seraphim covered their faces with wings, shielding themselves from the unbearable intensity of the Creator's glory, Lucifer seemed fashioned to bear that radiance directly. He was designed to shine, and shine he did. Lucifer's role was unlike any other angelic duty. He was not just a warrior, not only a messenger, he was the conductor of heaven's praise. When the heavenly choirs thundered in worship, it was Lucifer who led them. His voice was light itself. His song was a river of glory that carried creation's devotion to its source. Some early traditions even described that his very being contained instruments, as though music itself was built into his essence. He did not merely sing, he embodied worship. Every angel, Michael, Gabriel, and the myriad hosts, looked to him as he lifted his voice. His harmonies did not compete with God, they magnified him. Lucifer was not the focus of the worship, but the vessel through which it was gathered and elevated. To be near him was to be drawn upward, to feel your spirit caught in the stream of adoration that flowed toward the throne. Even Michael, the great archangel of battle, revered him. Michael's strength was in war, his cry was defiance against darkness, but Lucifer's was beauty. Michael honored him not as a rival, but as a companion. The two were brothers in glory, their roles distinct yet harmonious. One led the armies of heaven, the other led its choirs, and together they served the same king. Lucifer was admired, loved, and trusted by all. The younger angels looked to him as a mentor. His wisdom was unmatched, his counsel like a fountain of understanding. If ever heaven could boast of a prince, it was him. Some traditions even call him the morning star, not because he rivaled the Creator, but because he reflected the Creator's light in its most dazzling form. The being we now know as Satan, the deceiver, the accuser, was once the embodiment of everything pure and noble. The first chapter of his story is not darkness but brilliance. Before he was the serpent of Eden, he was heaven's highest glory. The greater the beauty, the greater the risk of corruption. A diamond, once shattered, cannot be pieced back together. The brighter the star, the deeper the shadow it casts when it falls. For now, in this early age of eternity, no shadow had yet touched him. To look upon Lucifer was to glimpse divine artistry, to see what creation could be at its highest. No war marred the heavens, no doubt had yet crept into the songs. But even here, especially here, the seeds of tragedy were waiting. Because perfection, if forgotten, can turn inward. Beauty, if worshipped, can become pride. And wisdom, if severed from its source, becomes cunning. The very gifts that made him heaven's masterpiece would one day become the weapons of his downfall. His beauty would make him vain. His wisdom would make him cunning. His power would make him ambitious. And his voice, once the anthem of heaven, would one day whisper rebellion. But in this moment, before the fracture, Lucifer stood as the greatest evidence of God's creativity. He was proof that the Creator delighted in splendor, that heaven itself was meant to be filled with light and joy. When he raised his hands and led the symphony of angels, eternity vibrated with glory. Even now, across the corridors of time, it is difficult not to wonder, how could one so radiant fall so far? And perhaps that question is the greatest mystery of all. How can the perfect become corrupted? How can love turn to hatred, adoration into envy, light into darkness? Philosophers and theologians have wrestled with this for centuries. But to understand the fall, one must first appreciate the height from which he fell. Lucifer was not created evil. He was not born with malice in his heart. He began as blameless, pure, magnificent. His story is not about a villain from the start. It is about a hero who turned against himself, a prince who became a tyrant, a star who consumed his own light. And that is why this tale is more than myth. It is warning. It is a mirror held up to every soul that forgets where its light comes from. Lucifer was the seal of perfection. But what happens when perfection begins to believe it is self-made? That is the question we face as we move into the next chapter. For here, at the height of his glory, the faintest whisper of pride began to stir. And from that whisper would rise a storm that would tear eternity apart. In chapter 3, we will witness the unthinkable, how the most beautiful being in creation planted within himself the seed of rebellion. Chapter 3, The Seed of Pride. For ages uncounted, heaven knew only harmony. The throne of God radiated unapproachable light, and around it every angel joined in song. At the center of that vast chorus was one voice that drew them together, Lucifer's. His melody was a river of glory, his beauty a living reflection of the Creator's splendor. All seemed eternal, unshakable, but eternity itself trembled when a single thought took root in the mind of heaven's brightest star. I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. That thought, so small, so hidden at first, was the fracture in the diamond, the first crack in perfection. No war had yet begun, no angel had yet fallen, but in that instant something shifted inside Lucifer's heart. For the first time, worship, once freely given to the Creator, was redirected inward. Lucifer began to look upon himself not as a reflection of divine glory, but as a source of glory. His beauty, unmatched among the hosts, became a mirror in which he adored himself. His wisdom, once the fountain of counsel to others, became the foundation of arrogance. The very gifts that had lifted him above the multitude now whispered that perhaps he deserved even more. At first, no one noticed. The songs still rose, the choirs still sang, and Lucifer's voice still soared above them. Outwardly, he was unchanged, still the conductor, still the radiant one. But something subtle began to erode his spirit. He grew quieter when others praised the Creator. He withdrew, just slightly, when the heavenly choirs thundered with joy. What had once been his delight became a burden. And this is where pride always begins, not with rebellion, but with distance. Not with an open attack, but with a silent retreat. Lucifer, the voice of heaven, began to step away from the song, the shock of the angels closest to him. They noticed the subtle silence, the moments when his harmonies no longer rang with the same fire. His eyes, once lifted to the throne, now lingered upon himself. His words grew colder, edged with a strange detachment. Where once he had inspired others to worship, now he inspired unease. It is chilling to realize that this was not forced upon him. No darkness invaded heaven from the outside. This corruption was born within the very heart of its brightest inhabitant. Pride was not an external enemy, it was an inward seed. And once planted, it began to grow. Lucifer's mind entertained questions never asked before. Why must all glory rise to the throne? Why should one sit exalted above all, while I, so radiant, so wise, so powerful, remain a servant? These thoughts were not shouted, they were whispered within, and yet they carried more weight than 1,000 battles. For what greater rebellion is there than to envy the Almighty? Isaiah's words, echoing centuries later, describe his ambition. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. That was the thought burning in Lucifer's heart. Not content with being heaven's first masterpiece, he longed for the crown itself. Lucifer's pride was not born from lack but from abundance. He did not envy because he was weak, but because he was strong. He did not hunger for more because he was deprived, but because he already had almost everything. His downfall began not in poverty, but in prosperity. The angels who admired him began to sense the change. They saw it in his gaze, in the way his once warm words grew sharp. He still spoke of light, but his tone carried shadows. Some drew back, uncertain. Others, however, felt strangely drawn to his confidence, his charisma, his quiet dissatisfaction. For pride, like a spark, is contagious. The heavenly courts remained radiant, but beneath the surface, a frost began to creep. The warmth of worship cooled wherever Lucifer's presence lingered. He did not yet declare his rebellion openly, but silence, distance, and subtle disdain were enough to plant doubts in those around him. Even Michael noticed. The great warrior of heaven still honored his brother, but he sensed the tension. The once perfect harmony between them began to strain. Michael's cry was always, "Who is like God?" But Lucifer's heart now whispered, "Why not me?" And in that contrast lies the clash that would one day tear heaven apart. For now, the rebellion was hidden, but the seed had been sown. This is the pattern of pride across all ages. It rarely begins with thunder or violence. It begins in the heart, quiet, subtle, unspoken. A turning inward, a refusal to give glory where it belongs. And once planted, pride does not remain small. It grows, it spreads, it consumes. The perfection of heaven was now an illusion. Beneath the brilliance, a storm was brewing. The angels did not yet know it, but their world was already changed. The most trusted of them all was withdrawing step by step from the song that held the universe together. And so, the greatest tragedy in history was set into motion, not with a sword, not with a cry of war, but with a thought. Lucifer, once the seal of perfection, began to believe that his perfection was his own. From that thought, the entire cosmos would be shaken. In Chapter 4, we will confront the dangerous mystery of freedom itself, and how the gift of free will became the stage on which the greatest rebellion in eternity would unfold. Chapter 4: Free Will and the Test. From the very beginning, God wove freedom into the fabric of creation. He could have fashioned his angels as flawless machines, obedient, mechanical, incapable of straying. But such obedience would not have been love. Real love requires choice, and choice demands risk. Thus, even in the radiant courts of heaven, where light blazed with perfection, every angel bore within them a sacred gift, the power to choose. They could choose to exalt the one seated on the throne, or they could turn away. They could choose to remain vessels of glory, or to seek glory for themselves. It was this gift, this terrifying, magnificent freedom, that became the stage for the first great test. Lucifer, the light-bearer, knew this freedom as intimately as any other angel. For ages he had used it to magnify the Creator, to lift songs that shook eternity. But now, with pride germinating in his heart, he began to test its limits. He no longer lifted his voice with the same joy. He no longer thrilled at the sight of the throne. Instead, he began to ask the question no angel had dared whisper: "Why must we bow?" It was subtle at first, a quiet murmur shared with only a few. His words did not openly defy God. They were carefully cloaked as questions, as musings, as curiosity. But in those hushed moments, Lucifer planted seeds of doubt. He invited others to ponder what had never been pondered. And that is how deception always begins, not with a declaration, but with a question. The angels he spoke to were struck by his charisma. How could they not be? He was still their prince, still radiant beyond comprehension. His voice carried weight. His presence was magnetic. When he wondered aloud why they must continually bend their knees, why their voices must forever exalt another, his companions felt the pull of his reasoning. "Do we not have power of our own?" he would ask softly. "Are we not magnificent in ourselves? Why must we diminish before a throne when we shine so brightly?" One by one, some began to listen. They did not immediately rebel. They did not yet turn against God. But they entertained the question. And once doubt enters, it rarely leaves unchanged. The heavenly courts remained brilliant, but beneath the surface of harmony, a quiet fracture widened. Lucifer's whispers spread like a hidden current. No army had been raised, no war had been declared, but the unity of heaven was being tested. The other angels noticed. Michael especially, fierce, steadfast, his devotion burning like fire, sensed the danger. Where Lucifer sowed questions, Michael answered with certainty. Who is like God? It was more than a name, it was a shield against pride. But not every angel found Michael's certainty compelling. For some, Lucifer's words resonated more deeply. Why? Because pride appeals not to weakness, but to strength. The angels were glorious. They were radiant. They were powerful. And now, for the first time, they were being told that perhaps their glory was enough, that perhaps the throne was unnecessary, that perhaps their wings could carry them higher without bowing. The Creator did not silence these questions with immediate judgment. He allowed them to be spoken, to be weighed, to be tested. For freedom cannot exist without the possibility of rebellion. If God had crushed Lucifer at the first whisper, the angels would have remained obedient, but only through fear, not love. Instead, he allowed choice to unfold. This was the trial of eternity, and Lucifer seized the opportunity. His whispers grew bolder, his circle of influence wider. The seeds of pride sprouted into a doctrine that the angels could be free from submission, free from kneeling, free from the limitations of worship. "Why should we bow?" he repeated. "Why should we serve? Do we not carry light of our own?" The very light in which they gloried was not their own, but borrowed from the one they now doubted. Yet deception blinds and pride deafens. Those who listened began to mistake reflection for source, gift for possession. As time passed, the fracture deepened. Some angels recoiled from Lucifer's words, horrified that such questions could even be uttered. Others lingered on the edge, unsettled yet curious. And some, drawn by his magnetism, captivated by his logic, began to lean toward his vision. It was not yet war, but it was treason in seed form. The first rebellion in history began not with armies, but with influence. Not with weapons, but with persuasion. Lucifer discovered that words could sway hearts, that charisma could rival loyalty, that doubt could gnaw away at devotion. The gift of free will had revealed its peril. The most magnificent creation of God was using it not to magnify the Creator, but to challenge him. Heaven still gleamed, but the harmony was fragile now. Every song of worship carried an unspoken question. Every gathering of angels hid invisible divisions. The unity that had once been unbreakable was being tested at its core. And it all came down to this: who would they choose? Some would cling to the throne, declaring, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." Others would follow the whispers of Lucifer, believing that freedom meant self-exaltation. The stage was set for the first great division. And though no sword had yet been drawn, the greatest war in eternity's history was about to begin. For now, though, we pause on the edge of that conflict, listening to the whispers that echo across heaven's halls. Why must we bow? In Chapter 5, we will witness the moment that changed everything, the great revelation of God's eternal plan, and the mystery that would drive Lucifer to his breaking point. Chapter 5. The Great Revelation. The whispers of doubt still lingered in the heavenly courts when God unveiled a plan so staggering that even the angels trembled in awe. It was not a response born of fear, nor an act of defense, but a revelation of divine intention, one that had been hidden in eternity, now brought into light. The Almighty declared that he would extend creation beyond the realm of spirit. He would craft a universe of matter, vast and unmeasurable, galaxies, stars, oceans, mountains, living creatures. But above all, he would shape a being unlike any other. A creature of dust and breath, fragile yet glorious, limited yet bearing the image of the infinite, humanity. The angels, who had known only spirit and fire, gasped at the mystery. What was man that God was mindful of him? What was this new race that would walk upon solid earth, eat, sleep, laugh, and yet carry the likeness of their Creator? The thought seemed both wondrous and strange. The Son, the eternal Word, who had dwelled forever with the Father, would one day clothe himself in this mortal frame. He would take on flesh, not as an angel, not as a being of pure light, but as a man. The heavens erupted in thunderous praise. Songs rose higher than ever before. The angels, awestruck, bowed in reverence at the depth of divine love, that the Almighty would so identify with his creation, that eternity itself would enter time, that the Word would become flesh. It was a mystery so profound that it defied comprehension. But not every voice joined the chorus. Lucifer, standing among the radiant host, heard the proclamation and did not rejoice. His heart recoiled. The idea of God himself stooping into human flesh seemed unthinkable, even offensive. To him, it was beneath the dignity of heaven's throne. that the eternal Son should one day walk in mortal weakness, limited by hunger, fatigue, and pain? Impossible, unacceptable. And yet the command was clear. The angels were to serve these future humans, minister to them, and, most shocking of all, bow before the Son in his incarnate form. Here, in this moment, pride erupted into outright defiance. Lucifer could not bear it. He had admired his own beauty and wisdom for too long to accept that a being of clay could hold a destiny greater than his own. His thoughts burned with indignation. Shall I, the morning star, bow to flesh? Shall I bend my knee to one clothed in weakness? I, who stand upon the stones of fire, who shine brighter than the constellations, shall I bow before dust? It was the turning point of eternity. For while the heavens shook with adoration, Lucifer's silence thundered louder than any song. He did not join the praise. He did not bow. In that refusal, the fracture of pride became rebellion. Some angels near him felt the shock. They turned to look, bewildered that the most radiant of their company stood unmoved. His face was set, his eyes cold, his wings folded in refusal. What had begun as whispers of pride now erupted into visible defiance. The Creator had revealed his greatest act of love, but in doing so, he had exposed the pride in his greatest creation. The light of revelation revealed the shadow within Lucifer's heart. The angels who loved the throne continued their song, overwhelmed with awe. They understood that the incarnation would be the bridge between God and man, that through it, redemption would one day come. They bowed in gratitude and wonder. But Lucifer's heart hardened. What they celebrated, he despised. This is why the revelation was both glorious and dangerous. For those who embraced it, it was the highest joy. For Lucifer, it was the final insult. His refusal to bow was not just pride, it was rebellion against the eternal plan of God. And rebellion is never silent for long. Lucifer began to speak more boldly now. No longer content with whispers, he questioned aloud the reasonableness of God's command. Shall the sons of fire serve the sons of clay? Shall the eternal bend before the fragile? Is this justice or humiliation? His words stirred unease. Some angels recoiled, horrified. Others hesitated. And still others, drawn by his rhetoric, found themselves agreeing. The heavenly courts, once filled only with praise, now quivered with division. One moment had split the host of heaven, those who bowed in awe and those who questioned in pride. It is here that the war truly began, not yet with swords or thunder, but with allegiance. The line was drawn not by violence, but by worship. Whom would they serve? Whom would they exalt? Lucifer's refusal to bow was not a small act. It was a cosmic declaration. By rejecting the incarnation, he rejected the very heart of God's plan, love expressed through humility. This is the essence of his fall. Pride cannot comprehend humility. Ambition cannot fathom sacrifice. Lucifer, drunk on his own glory, could not accept a God who would lower himself to raise others. And so the stage was set for open conflict. The heavens had witnessed the greatest revelation, the creation of man in God's image, and the mystery of the Word made flesh. Most of the angels rejoiced, but one, heaven's brightest, turned away. The universe would never be the same again. In chapter 6, we will see confrontation erupt. No longer whispers, no longer silent defiance, but an open clash between Lucifer and Michael, between pride and humility, between the morning star and the Almighty's command. The rebellion was about to ignite. Chapter 6, the confrontation and the challenge. The heavenly courts had never known division before. For ages, every voice had been united, every song woven into a single tapestry of praise. But now, the great revelation of God's eternal plan, the creation of humanity and the incarnation of his Son, had torn back the veil and exposed the fracture in Lucifer's heart. What began as whispers was now defiance. What began as subtle silence now stood in open refusal. God, in his mercy, did not strike Lucifer down immediately. Again and again the Almighty extended warnings. His voice thundered with both justice and compassion, giving Lucifer opportunity to repent, to return, to lay aside his pride before it consumed him. Every warning was an act of grace, a chance to turn from destruction. But Lucifer's pride had hardened into iron. Each word of warning he heard as humiliation. Each call to repent he twisted into accusation. In his mind, the throne was no longer a place of majesty, but of tyranny. And so, the light-bearer, once heaven's masterpiece, refused. It was in this atmosphere of mounting tension that another voice rose to challenge him. A voice that carried the authority of conviction, not cunning. A voice that was not deceived by pride's false reasoning. The voice of Michael. Michael, the archangel of war, the protector of God's people, stepped forward into the courts blazing with holy fire. He looked upon Lucifer, not with envy, not with admiration, but with sorrow and resolve. Where Lucifer's words dripped with arrogance, Michael's rang with clarity. He did not argue philosophy. He did not reason endlessly. Instead, he asked a single question that shattered every illusion. Who is like God? It was both a cry and a sword, a declaration that no throne could rival the Almighty's, no angel could claim equality with the Creator, no creature could ascend to the place of the infinite. In that moment, Michael's very name became his weapon, his anthem, his defiance against pride. The cry echoed like thunder across heaven. Angels trembled as the sound rolled through the courts, and instantly, sides were drawn. For Michael's question was not merely rhetorical, it was a dividing line. Those who still revered the throne rallied to his side, emboldened by his courage. Those who had been wavering, enchanted by Lucifer's rhetoric, now faced the sharpness of truth. Many recoiled, returning to loyalty. But others hardened themselves, choosing pride over humility, defiance over worship. Lucifer sneered at the challenge. His once beautiful voice, now tinged with bitterness, replied not with humility, but with disdain. "Who is like God?" he repeated mockingly. "Are we not radiant? Do we not carry light of our own? Why should we bow endlessly before a throne that refuses to share its glory?" His words rippled through the assembly, and the tension thickened like a storm about to break. Some angels gasped in horror. Others nodded in agreement. The heavenly host was no longer one chorus, but two factions, divided by pride and devotion, rebellion and loyalty. The perfection of heaven shattered not by sword or flame, but by dialogue, by confrontation between two angels whose names would forever embody the cosmic struggle. Lucifer, the light-bearer who would not bow, and Michael, the warrior whose very existence declared that none could rival the Almighty. Michael's cry became the rallying point for the faithful. It was not a call to violence, but a call to truth. "Who is like God?" he thundered again, and with every repetition, angels on the brink of doubt found their strength renewed. Their wings unfolded, their voices rose, their allegiance declared. Lucifer, however, was not silenced. His charisma still burned, his presence still commanded attention. "Brothers," he called, "do not be deceived by fear. Do not surrender your freedom. We were made glorious. Why should our glory be chained? Rise with me, and you will never bow again." The courts shook with turmoil. What had been one song was now a clash of voices, truth against deception, loyalty against pride. The confrontation had become a dividing sword, cutting through the very heart of heaven's host. And yet, even here, God's patience lingered. The Creator did not unleash immediate judgment. He allowed the angels to choose, to reveal their allegiance, to stand where their hearts truly belonged. For the war of heaven was not merely about power, it was about worship. And worship cannot be coerced. Lucifer's defiance was now undeniable. Michael's challenge was unmistakable. The hosts of heaven faced the greatest decision of eternity, to follow pride into rebellion, or to remain faithful to the one who was, is, and always will be. The cry of Michael echoed once more. "Who is like God?" And this time it was not just a question. It was a battle line. It was the spark that would ignite the war to come. From this confrontation, there could be no turning back. Lucifer had chosen his path. Michael had declared his stand. The angels of heaven were no longer united. The stage was set for the greatest conflict the cosmos had ever seen. A war not of kingdoms on earth, but of eternity itself. In Chapter 7, the whispers will erupt into shouts, the seeds of rebellion will burst into flame, and the first war in heaven will begin. Chapter 7, the outbreak of rebellion. Heaven had always known only unity. From the moment of their creation, the angels had lifted one voice, one song, one allegiance. But now that harmony was shattered, the confrontation between Michael and Lucifer had drawn a line in eternity itself. No longer whispers, no longer private doubts. Lucifer now stood openly against the throne, and his defiance ignited the unthinkable, the first rebellion in the history of creation. Lucifer's voice, once the anthem of worship, became the rallying cry of pride. No longer did he sing of the Almighty's greatness. Instead, he proclaimed his own vision. He walked among the angels like a firebrand, his words burning with passion, his presence intoxicating. Where once his melodies had lifted spirits heavenward, now his rhetoric pulled them downward, binding them to himself. "Why should we bow forever?" he thundered. "We are radiant. We are strong. Do we not carry light within ourselves? Why should our glory be chained to another? Follow me, and we will be free. Follow me, and you will share my throne. No longer servants, we shall be rulers." The shock of his speech echoed through the heavens. Never before had such words been uttered. Angels who had never known division now faced a choice. Some recoiled instantly, horrified that one so exalted could blaspheme against the Creator. But others, drawn by his charisma, stirred by his promises, began to waver. The questions he posed awakened pride in them as well. And slowly, numbers gathered at his side. They were not the weakest angels, nor the smallest. Many were mighty, radiant, gifted with power and wisdom. They had admired Lucifer for ages, had followed his lead in worship. Now they followed him in rebellion. One, by tens, by hundreds, by thousands, they aligned themselves with the morning star. Until at last, a third of the host of heaven had declared their allegiance to him. It was staggering. Heaven, once undivided light, now bore the shadow of division. An army of rebels had arisen in a place where no darkness had ever dwelt. Michael and the faithful hosts watched in grief and horror as comrades, once brothers in song, now crossed the line into treachery. Lucifer reveled in his triumph. His wings stretched wide as he looked upon the multitude gathered behind him. Never before had an angel commanded such a following. He called them not servants, but brothers, promising them crowns of their own. He painted visions of a new order where no one bowed, where every angel would reign. To those who longed for freedom from submission, his vision seemed intoxicating. But what he called freedom was only bondage to pride. The angels who followed him did not yet realize that their rebellion had no future. They believed they were choosing liberty, but in truth they were walking into chains. For no creature can exalt itself above the Creator without becoming enslaved to its own corruption. Yet in that moment, their eyes were blinded by ambition. And so the heavens trembled. Where once there had been only worship, now there were war cries of defiance. The courts of glory rang with the clash of voices. Michael's cry, "Who is like God?" resounded as a shield of truth. But Lucifer's shouts of pride echoed louder to those already ensnared. It was then that the first army of rebellion was formed. The very idea was unimaginable, an army in heaven. But there it stood, a host of angels arrayed not in worship, but in defiance, their allegiance bound to a creature rather than the Creator. Heaven had never seen such darkness before. Once, there was no shadow here, Michael declared, his voice shaking with sorrow. But now, behold, an army of rebellion. That moment was a wound in eternity itself. The loyal angels tightened their ranks around the throne, their wings blazing with light, their voices uniting in worship. They did not waver, for their loyalty was unshakable, yet even they felt the sting of betrayal. Friends they had loved for eons now stood on the other side, eyes filled not with devotion, but with pride. Lucifer, emboldened, lifted his voice again. "See how many stand with me, a third of heaven. We are not few, we are mighty. With us lies the future, not an endless bowing to a throne that diminishes us. Together we shall rise above the stars of God. Together we shall be greater than him." His words were blasphemy, but to his followers they sounded like destiny. They roared their allegiance, wings beating like thunder. For the first time in history, heaven shook not with worship, but with division, not with unity, but with rebellion. The morning star, once heaven's masterpiece, now crowned himself leader of the fallen. And so the cosmos faced a terrible reality. Heaven was no longer whole. A fracture had become a canyon had become a battlefield. The day of decision had passed. The rebellion had begun. What had been whispers in secret was now an open uprising. What had been a seed was now a storm, and at the heart of it stood Lucifer, the angel who dared to exalt himself above God. In chapter 8, rebellion will give way to war. Heaven itself will become a battlefield. Michael will rise to lead the faithful, and the clash of eternity will erupt in the first great war of heaven. Chapter 8, the war in heaven. The heavens had never known such a moment. For ages there had been no conflict, no clash of wills, no fracture of purpose. But now, the harmony of eternity was shattered. The throne room, once filled only with worship, now quaked beneath the thunder of division. The morning star had raised his army, and the faithful stood firm at the throne. Heaven itself had become a battlefield. Lucifer stood at the head of his vast host, wings outstretched, his beauty twisted by pride. His followers arrayed behind him like a sea of defiance, their eyes burning with ambition. Across from them stood Michael, his countenance blazing not with vanity but with resolve. Around him gathered the loyal angels, radiant in their devotion, their wings shining with unyielding light. And then the silence broke. Lucifer's voice rang out like a trumpet of defiance. "The throne is mine, the heavens are ours. Follow me, and we will ascend above the stars of God." But Michael answered with no elaborate speech, no cunning rhetoric. He lifted his sword, gleaming with holy fire, and his cry thundered across the heavens. "Who is like God?" It was more than a question. It was a weapon. The words pierced through pride and echoed as truth itself. The hosts of heaven roared the answer with one voice: "No one!" And in that instant, war began. The clash was unlike anything creation had ever seen. Not with iron blades, not with earthly weapons, but with forces far beyond mortal comprehension. Light against shadow, truth against deception, loyalty against rebellion. The air itself blazed as angels collided, their power shaking the very foundations of eternity. Lucifer fought with cunning brilliance. His followers moved with precision, their strength formidable. They were not weak angels. They were the brightest, the most gifted, deceived into turning their glory against its source. Every strike of their power seemed enough to rend galaxies, every clash enough to tear worlds apart. But Michael's army fought with something Lucifer could not imitate: devotion. Their strength was not in themselves, but in the one they served. Every cry of "Who is like God?" resounded like a thunderclap, breaking the arrogance of their foes. Their weapons were truth. Their shield was loyalty. Their victory was faith. The war raged in realms unseen. Waves of angels crashed against each other like storms colliding. Lightning of unimaginable power split the skies of heaven. Songs once united now clashed as battle cries. The radiance of loyal angels burned against the corrupted brilliance of the rebels. For a moment it seemed as though Lucifer might prevail. His charisma had swayed a third of heaven. His strategy was calculated, his defiance unshakable. He moved like a commander born for conquest, his followers driven by promises of crowns and thrones. Their numbers were vast, their ambition fierce. But ambition cannot outshine truth. Every time Michael raised his voice, the heavens trembled. His cry was not for himself, but for the glory of God alone. And that cry spread courage among the loyal, strengthening their resolve, turning doubt into conviction. Who is like God? The question itself shattered the illusion of Lucifer's pride. For every angel knew deep within that no created being could rival the Creator. And so the tide began to turn. Lucifer's brilliance dimmed under the relentless blaze of devotion. His words, once persuasive, now sounded hollow against the cry of loyalty. His army faltered as angels realized the emptiness of his promises. For all his boasting, he could not answer Michael's question. Who is like God? Not Lucifer, not any of them. Michael, sword raised high, advanced toward Lucifer himself. The morning star met him, fury blazing, wings unfurled in defiance. Their clash was the apex of the war, light against light, glory against glory, pride against humility. Lucifer struck with fury, but Michael's strength did not waver, for he did not fight in his own power but in the name of the Almighty. Every strike of Michael's blade rang with eternal truth. Every cry of his voice bore the weight of the throne itself. Lucifer, the brightest of angels, staggered. His brilliance faltered. His glory, once unmatched, was eclipsed. Michael, not Lucifer, stood as the true hero of heaven. Not because he was more beautiful, not because he was more powerful, but because he was faithful. His greatness lay not in himself, but in his refusal to claim what belonged only to God. The war was decided. Lucifer's army, though vast, was broken. Their unity dissolved, their arrogance crushed. They had believed the morning star would carry them to victory, but instead he led them to ruin. The heavens rang, not with their songs, but with their cries of defeat. Lucifer, the light-bearer, was no longer a prince of heaven. He was cast down, no longer radiant but fallen, no longer glorious but accursed. His followers, once angels of light, became shadows of their former selves. The rebellion had ended, and the victors were not those who sought to ascend, but those who chose to remain faithful. The heavens, though scarred by battle, resounded once more with praise. The cry of Michael and his army thundered louder than ever. Who is like God? And so it was sealed. Michael, not Lucifer, became the hero of heaven. The morning star, once the masterpiece of creation, had been eclipsed by devotion, defeated by humility, overcome by truth. But though the battle was over, the war was not finished. For Lucifer, now Satan, cast down from glory, carried with him fury and hatred. If he could not conquer heaven, he would turn his rage against something else, something new, something vulnerable. In chapter 9, we will see what became of the fallen, the exile of Lucifer and his legions, and how their hatred turned toward the creation of God on earth. Chapter 9, the fall and the expulsion. The battle had reached its terrible conclusion. The loyal hosts of heaven stood victorious, their voices once more lifted in praise to the Almighty. Yet the victory was not without cost. For though light had triumphed over pride, a wound had been carved into eternity. The scars of rebellion could not be erased, and peace, once perfect, once unbroken, would never again feel the same. Lucifer, the radiant morning star, had fallen. No longer clothed in splendor, no longer the voice of heaven's choirs, his beauty was twisted, his wisdom corrupted, his glory stripped away. He had traded the crown of light for the chains of darkness. His very name was torn from him. No longer the bearer of light, he became the adversary. No longer Lucifer, he was Satan. The judgment of God thundered across the heavens. The rebels could no longer remain in his presence. There could be no compromise, no divided throne, no shadow beside the light, and so it was decreed the rebels would be cast out. Once these angels had walked the stones of fire, basked in the radiance of the throne, and sung the eternal song of glory. Now, stripped of honor, they trembled before the word of judgment. 1/3 of heaven's host, once glorious, now condemned. The gates of heaven blazed with fire as the rebels were driven out. Their cries echoed with fury and despair, their wings torn from brilliance into shadow. The heavens shook as they fell, cast down from the heights of eternity into the abyss below. They plummeted like stars ripped from the sky, their descent marking the first exile in history. Lucifer screamed in rage as he fell, his voice no longer a hymn but a curse. His promise of thrones and crowns had dissolved into ruin. His army, once radiant, became grotesque. Angels no longer, but fallen, twisted, bearing the mark of rebellion. And when the last of them had been cast out, silence filled the heavens. A silence not of peace, but of mourning. For though loyalty had prevailed, heaven was forever changed. This was the first wound of creation. Never before had sorrow touched the angels, but now they wept. They had lost brothers, companions, friends with whom they had sung for ages. The harmony of heaven was restored, but it was thinner now, tinged with memory. The knowledge that even perfection could fracture hung heavy in the air. And yet, the throne still stood. The Almighty remained unshaken. His plan endured. Though rebellion had scarred heaven, it had not toppled it. The cries of Michael and the faithful rang out again. Who is like God? And their devotion filled the void left by the fallen. But the story of the rebels was not over, for their exile was not annihilation. God, in his wisdom, did not erase them. Instead, he cast them into the abyss, the realm of darkness, a prison prepared for those who rejected the light. There, Lucifer and his host were bound in disgrace, yet their hatred only deepened. Banished from heaven, they turned their fury against the Creator's next work, the world of men. If they could not overthrow the throne of heaven, they would seek to corrupt the image of God upon the earth. In his rebellion, Lucifer had sought to exalt himself above all. Yet in his fall, he was destined to become the tempter, the deceiver, the corrupter. From leading the choirs of heaven, he descended to hissing lies and shadows. From lifting worship to God, he devoted himself to dragging creation into ruin. This transformation was complete. He had fallen from light to darkness, from prince to adversary, from masterpiece to monster. And heaven, though victorious, bore the scar. The peace was restored, but innocence was lost. For the first time, angels knew what it was to grieve. They had seen beauty turn to corruption, loyalty turn to treason, love turn to hatred. The wound would heal, but the memory would endure. And all of heaven now understood. Free will carried cost, pride carried ruin, and even the brightest star could become the darkest enemy. Yet even here, hidden within judgment, was a whisper of hope. For the Almighty had already revealed his plan. The Word would become flesh, and through that mystery, redemption would be made possible. Lucifer's rebellion was not the end, but the beginning of a greater story. Heaven, once without shadow, now carried the memory of exile. Never again would it be untouched by sorrow. The morning star had become the enemy, and though he was defeated, he was not destroyed. His rage would smolder, his hatred burn, his war continue, not in heaven, but on earth. In chapter 10, we will follow Satan's new mission, his descent into the Garden of Eden, his first attempt to corrupt humanity, and how his hatred for God found its first target in the sons and daughters of dust. Chapter 10. Satan's new mission. Cast down from heaven, stripped of his glory, Lucifer entered his exile consumed by rage. What had begun as pride now hardened into hatred. He could not ascend the throne of the Almighty nor reclaim his former brilliance. But in his fury, a new mission was born. If he could not defeat God in heaven, he would wage war against God's creation on earth. The abyss became his dwelling, the shadows his cloak. Yet even there his mind burned with strategy. The angels who fell with him, now twisted into demons, looked to him for purpose, and he gave it to them. Destroy the work of God. Corrupt the image of the Creator wherever it appeared. And soon, the first target came into view. For the Almighty, in his infinite wisdom, shaped a new world. The void gave way to stars, seas, and land. Plants sprang forth, animals roamed, and rivers coursed through valleys. But the pinnacle of this creation was not the stars nor the beasts of the earth. It was man. Formed from the dust, yet carrying the very breath of God, Adam and Eve were unlike any beings before. They bore the image of the Creator himself. They walked in innocence, clothed not in garments but in glory, dwelling in the Garden of Eden in fellowship with their Maker. To Satan, it was unbearable. These fragile beings of clay had been given what he had lost: favor with God, intimacy with the Almighty, the promise of dominion. Where he had been cast down, they were lifted up. Where he had been stripped, they were crowned. His hatred sharpened into resolve. If he could not strike heaven, he would strike its reflection. If he could not unseat God, he would corrupt those made in God's image. And so, the serpent entered the garden. His voice, once the melody of heaven, now coiled with deception. He did not appear with fire or thunder. He whispered. He questioned. Did God really say? The same tactic he had once used in heaven, the power of suggestion, he now turned against humanity. To Eve he planted the seed of doubt. You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. It was the same ambition that had corrupted his own heart. I will ascend. Now he offered it to humanity, and they took it. The fruit was eaten, and with it came the first fracture on earth. Innocence was lost. Shame entered. Death began. What Satan could not achieve in heaven, he achieved on earth: rebellion. Humanity, created to walk in harmony with their Maker, now hid from his presence. The serpent had won his first victory, but his mission did not end there. Across the centuries, Satan's role became clear: the adversary, the accuser, the tempter. He sought not only to lead astray, but to destroy faith itself. Job, a righteous man in the land of Uz, Satan appeared before God and demanded permission to test him. Does Job fear God for nothing? Stretch out your hand and strike all he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. His purpose was not merely suffering, it was to sever faith, to prove that no human could remain loyal under trial. Job lost his wealth, his children, his health, yet still he clung to God. The adversary was defeated, but his cruelty was revealed. When the Son of God himself walked the earth, clothed in flesh, Satan saw his chance. In the wilderness, after 40 days of fasting, he approached Jesus. He did not come with armies, but with offers. If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. Throw yourself down, for the angels will lift you up. Bow to me, and I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. It was the same temptation from Eden, repackaged. Grasp power, seize glory, exalt yourself. But where Adam and Eve fell, Jesus stood. He answered not with pride, but with Scripture. It is written. 3 times the adversary pressed, 3 times he was silenced. This was the pattern of Satan's mission: twist truth, tempt pride, lure hearts into rebellion. He could not destroy the throne, so he sought to poison the world. No longer the angel who led heaven's choir, he became the whisperer in shadows, the deceiver of nations, the adversary of souls. His transformation was complete. The morning star had become the serpent, the accuser, the tempter, the enemy. And yet, hidden within his mission was a mystery he did not foresee. For every temptation he brought, God turned a testimony. For every accusation he raised, God answered with redemption. Even at the cross, when Satan thought he had won by striking down the Son, he sealed his own defeat. Still, his fury endures. The abyss could not contain him. The earth became his battleground, and until the final day, he prowls like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But never forget, Satan's mission is born of failure. He fights not as a victor, but as one already cast down. His rebellion, his temptations, his accusations, they are the desperate acts of a fallen being, lashing out against the light he can never reclaim. From choirs of worship to whispers of doubt, from beauty to deception, From leader to corrupter, this is the path of Satan's new mission. In chapter 11, we will step into prophecy itself, into the visions of Revelation where Satan appears not merely as a serpent or tempter, but as the great dragon, deceiving nations, leading beasts and false prophets, and preparing for his final downfall. Chapter 11. Satan's role in the end times. The story of Satan does not end with Eden, nor with the wilderness, nor even at the cross. Though he was defeated by Christ's sacrifice, he still roams, relentless, awaiting the final hour. And Scripture declares that his fury will rise to its peak in the last days. The book of Revelation unveils him in terrifying imagery. He is no longer seen merely as the serpent of Eden, nor as the tempter in shadows, but as the great dragon, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. His form in prophecy is monstrous, his power vast, his influence global. The vision John records is not myth, it is warning. The dragon does not work alone. Revelation reveals that in the end times he empowers two great figures, the beast and the false prophet. The beast rises from the sea, crowned with blasphemy, wielding authority over nations. The false prophet emerges from the earth, performing wonders, deceiving the multitudes, compelling worship of the beast. Together, they form an unholy trinity, dragon, beast, and prophet, mirroring and mocking the divine. And behind them all, orchestrating their power, is Satan himself. His rebellion, once hidden in whispers, now culminates in open defiance against God on a global scale. No longer confined to deceiving individuals, he deceives nations. No longer content to whisper lies, he builds empires of false worship. The end is not a quiet fading, but an escalation. Light and darkness once again collide, not in heaven, but upon the stage of human history. The dragon wages war not only against God, but specifically against those who belong to him. Revelation declares that he was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. The faithful become his prime target. Persecution intensifies, deception spreads, the world trembles under the weight of his fury, and yet, even in this darkness, there is light. For Revelation also reveals that the Lamb still reigns. The dragon may roar, but he does not rule. His time is short. Every move he makes, every empire he raises, every deception he weaves, hastens the day of his own destruction. His rebellion is vast, but it is doomed. Still, the imagery is sobering. A world united under deception, nations bowing to the beast, miracles performed by the false prophet, people marked by allegiance to powers that defy God. To the eyes of flesh, it will seem as though darkness has triumphed. To the faithful, it will be the severest test of loyalty in history. This is the climax of Satan's role, the great counterfeit kingdom, the false dominion that parades as victory but is built on sand. Just as in heaven, where Michael's cry shattered Lucifer's pride, so again the final battle belongs not to the dragon, but to the Lamb. Revelation 12 declares that Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. And in the end, the prophecy completes itself. The dragon, that ancient serpent, is cast down once and for all. Armies gathered, the world engulfed in chaos, the beast defiant, the prophet deceiving, the dragon raging. It is the darkest hour of history. But then, the heavens open. The rider on the white horse descends, crowned with many crowns, his robe dipped in blood, his name called the Word of God. And with him comes victory. In that final confrontation, Satan's rebellion collapses. His kingdom crumbles, his servants fall, and his power is stripped forever. Revelation speaks with finality. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. The great dragon, once the morning star, once the choir leader of heaven, once the tempter of Eden, ends not in triumph but in ruin. His rebellion, centuries long, concludes in eternal defeat. And yet, the prophecy is not merely a story of his downfall. It is a warning and a choice. For Revelation was not written to entertain but to awaken. The dragon still prowls until his final hour. His lies still seduce. His rage still hunts. The question remains, whom will you follow? The counterfeit freedom of the dragon or the eternal truth of the Lamb? The final battle is not only cosmic, it is personal. Every life becomes a battlefield. Every choice is a stand, either with the deceiver or with the Savior. The end of Satan is certain. The question is not whether he will fall, but whether we will fall with him. Heaven once bore its first wound when the morning star rebelled. Earth bears its wounds still from his deception. But Revelation assures us of the final word. Light will triumph. Darkness will end. The Lamb will reign. Final, we will draw from this cosmic war the lesson meant not for angels, but for us. For you, for me, for every soul who must choose between pride and humility, rebellion and faith, darkness and light. The story of Lucifer is not only about angels and battles beyond the stars. It is a mirror, showing us how even the brightest light can be corrupted when pride takes root. His fall reminds us that greatness without humility becomes destruction, and freedom without devotion becomes slavery. For those of us who have walked many years on this earth, the lesson is sharper still. Pride is not only the sin of angels, it is the quiet temptation of daily life. It whispers when we think we no longer need God, when we believe our strength or wisdom is enough. But pride always isolates, always blinds, always leads downward. The good news is this: love and humility endure forever. Where pride collapses, humility builds. Where arrogance divides, love restores. And while Satan's story ends in exile and ruin, the story of those who walk humbly with God ends in hope and eternal light. So choose the light. Stand with faith, with humility, with love. For in the end, good will not only survive, it will triumph. But ask yourself this: if even the greatest angel could fall, what does that mean for us? And what if Lucifer was not the only one? That story is still waiting to be told.